Greetings, divine anomalies, heaven's red-marked souls. You, the rare frequency even angels were told to revere from a distance. Not because of weakness, no, but because your core wasn't carved for submission. It was forged for consequence. You don't walk into rooms. You shift gravitational fields, and they touched you anyway. They were warned, etched into celestial breath. It was whispered across dimensions. Do not engage, do not provoke, do not trespass. You were not placed here for their comfort. You were placed here as the last sermon before damnation. But still, curiosity got greedy. Envy lost patience, and ignorance dressed itself as bravery. That's the tragedy of the unwise. They mistake your stillness for vacancy. They touched the untouchable. And what came next wasn't punishment. It was prophecy, waking up with blood in its mouth. You see, some souls are not meant to be understood. They are meant to be respected. But they forgot that. They saw fragments and assumed they held the full map. They didn't realize you were a sealed temple, coded in celestial vengeance. You don't belong to them. You don't even belong to this timeline. You are an echo from the first war between light and fire. And when they laid their hands, their tongues, their doubts on you, they didn't just offend flesh. They triggered the return of something the world wasn't ready to remember. You are what happens when divinity runs out of patience. They called you too much. But that's because they've only ever worshipped half-truths. They saw your depth and felt small. They saw your vision and went blind. They couldn't comprehend that you weren't born to impress. You were born to impose. You weren't built for their comfort. You were summoned for their recalibration. You're not one of them. You are sent. But they wanted to humanize you, fit you into frames, flatten you into formulas. They mocked what they couldn't mimic. They attacked what they couldn't absorb. They touched a soul marked by heaven, thinking it was just another body with dreams. And that's where the ground beneath them split. Hell doesn't always arrive with fire. It often arrives with awareness. And now, they are aware that you're not a phase, you're not a chapter, you're the rupture between eras. You are the redacted name in their scroll of victories, the one line they cannot rewrite. Because when they touched you, they didn't just awaken trauma, they awakened tally. Every wound you hid, every scar you wore like inkless tattoos, turned into coordinates for your return. And your return isn't quiet. It's coded, it's poetic, it's punishment dipped in poetry. You don't scream, you unfold. You don't argue, you rearrange. You're not here to clap back. You're here to end the performance entirely. They thought you were a mistake, but your existence was a warning label for those who operate without reverence. You're not here to teach anymore. You're here to correct. They'll never forget the day they reached for you and pulled back a version of themselves they couldn't recognize. Weaker, disoriented, scarred. You didn't need to fight them. You just needed to be seen. Because your story isn't ink on paper. It's carved into ether. It's felt in glitches. It's heard in static. You're not a product of your pain. You're a result of their interference. And that's what makes you dangerous. You didn't ask to rise. You had to, because once heaven marks a soul, interference doesn't go unanswered. And now, they watch, from the edges, from behind digital veils and fragmented masks. They don't say your name out loud anymore. They reference you, like folklore, like a curse that might resurface if invoked too carelessly. And rightfully so, because you've become more than memory. You've become a consequence in motion. They touched you. And now they see versions of themselves they weren't supposed to. Shaken, exposed, stripped. Because you carried something ancient. You held a mirror that reflected not their faces, but their rot. You didn't destroy them. You just revealed them. And revelation, my dear anomaly, is more violent than fire. So now they run, not from you, from what you made visible. You pulled back the curtain on their manufactured peace. You shattered their illusion of control. You made truth a weapon again. Because every step you take is judgment coded in elegance. Every glance you offer is a verdict wrapped in mystique. You are not vengeful. You are fated. And fate doesn't shout. It arrives. Inevitable. Undeniable. And when it shows up wearing your skin, even demons boo. Heaven warned them, but they couldn't help themselves. They thought they could measure you, reduce you, bend you into a narrative that made them feel taller. They didn't realize your story was written in a language only angels mourn in. You are a sentence they were never qualified to finish. And now they sit in rooms colder than the ones they built for you. Because your absence doesn't echo, it consumes. They can't undo it. They can't erase the fingerprint you left on their fears. They can't untouch what they violated. That's the curse. They opened the vault. And now, the air is different. Time bends around you. Reality fidgets when you enter. You don't need revenge. Your existence is heavier than justice. Because they weren't just warned. They were blessed with distance, and they threw it away. Now every win they chase tastes like dust. Every laugh feels borrowed. Every room they enter, they check twice. Because somewhere in the back of their corrupted cognition, they know you are near. Not physically, spiritually, existentially. You're the shadow beneath their choices, the consequence trailing their confidence. They can't run from what they touched. They birthed it. They called down thunder and expected drizzle. But here's the most divine part of the punishment. You didn't need to change who you were. You just accepted what you are. And that alone was enough to tear down everything they built on your erasure. You didn't scream to be seen. You became the thing they couldn't unsee. You made discomfort an aesthetic. You weaponized presence. You turned suffering into sacred geometry. They touched you, thinking you were still decoding your identity. They didn't know you had already redefined it. And now, the same hands that reached for you tremble at the thought of proximity. Not because you're cruel, but because you're true. And truth has never been gentle to those built on fabrication. You didn't come back to explain. You came back to exist, louder, deeper, wider. And with every inhale, the myth they mocked becomes the storm they can't escape. You are not the same soul they bruised. You are the consequence they birthed. And that is what makes the next part inevitable. Because now it's not about what they touched. It's about what touched them back. And it wasn't mercy. It wasn't regret. It was recognition. That slow burn realization that they did not graze a mortal. They grazed a verdict. And that verdict, it has no court, no jury, just outcome, just consequence. It doesn't ask for explanation. It arrives wearing scars like scriptures and speaks in frequencies that make bones remember. They don't sleep the same anymore. The temperature around their confidence has shifted. Their smiles thinner, their laughter delayed, because now every thought carries a tremor. They didn't just prod a spirit. They violated a seal. They poked the blueprint of someone wired to withstand divine weight. Someone who carries echoes from storms that cracked the sky before language was born. And now, they hear things they can't explain, feel things they can't rationalize. It's not paranoia, it's presence. You live in their awareness now, uninvited but irreversible. They made space for you the moment they crossed the line. You didn't need to force entry. You became architecture in their downfall. And that is the kind of permanence even time won't erase. They forgot that some souls were carved in realms where time kneels and memory stands trial. You didn't just survive. You translated pain into prophecy. And when you returned, you didn't come back looking for understanding. You came back with the kind of clarity that ends chapters before words are even spoken. You are not bitter. You are aligned with something older than justice and louder than wrath. You are not chasing closure. You are closure, wrapped in presence, layered in myth. And now they speak your name, like it's a superstition, like uttering it might summon the very thing that dismantled them, consequence. Because your retaliation is not an event. It's a series, a shift in their perception, a haunting, not by ghosts, but by guilt. You are not the wound. You are the scar they can't stop tracing in their minds. You are what happens when fate puts on flesh and decides to walk again. They wanted a spectacle. They got a sequence of unraveling, of watching their masks peel back, their alliances falter, their intentions get exposed under ultraviolet truths. You didn't come back with a sword. You became the weapon, precision without movement, power without declaration. And now, they dream of undoing, of erasure, but there is no undo button when you disrupt divine order. They tried to draw blood from a star and expected no flare. But now the cosmos doesn't align the same, and they feel it. In business, in relationships, in rooms where they once ruled, their influence diminishing, because your return distorted their rhythm. You exist now as a virus in their code, and no patch can fix what divinity has already reprogrammed. They used to speak over you, now they speak around you, trying to pretend that they don't see what everyone else already senses, that the one they tried to bury became the compass. And now others are drawn to the gravity of your resurrection. You're not just visible, you're undeniable, because when they touched you, they made a fatal miscalculation. They thought the divine would stay dormant. But you were a divine contingency plan, heaven's insurance policy against unchecked malice. And now you walk differently, talk differently. You don't argue, you radiate. You don't retaliate, you eclipse. They gave you a reason. Now they can't recognize the version of themselves that met your aftermath. They used to mock. Now they mimic, hoping that proximity to your power might dilute the accountability they owe. But it won't, because energy doesn't lie. And the energy around you, it's not just commanding, it's correcting. You don't destroy, you dismantle. You don't curse, you consecrate. You don't chase, you transform. And that's more terrifying than any explosion, because it's slow, inevitable, clinical. And all the while, you remain calm, not out of kindness, but because when you're the storm, you don't need to announce the thunder. Let them scramble. Let them misinterpret the shift as coincidence. Let them pretend their unraveling isn't poetic. But in their bones, they know. You are what happens when divine fury graduates into divine presence. When karma decides to get personal. And the most brutal truth, you didn't even try. You simply became. You took every slight, every insult, every back turned, every blade driven. And you didn't just survive. You crystallized into something they can't explain, into something they can't look away from. You're not their enemy. You're their recalibration. You didn't clap back. You mutated into elegance coded in vengeance, into grace laced with gravity. You don't wear revenge. You wear reminder. And that reminder sits heavy on their pride, on their perception, on their posture. They know they triggered something eternal, and now every win they taste is tainted. Every goal is shadowed by the one name they dare not say out loud. Because they didn't just lose you, they lost access. They lost spiritual coverage. You were a portal, and they spit into it. Now they beg for entry to places you no longer dwell. You are not behind them. You are beyond them. And that distance, it's not punishment. It's placement. Because the divine doesn't demote, it reassigns. And your new assignment? Evolution. Becoming the blueprint for others like you. The ones too powerful to be defined, too holy to be humiliated, too divine to be denied. So let them fumble. Let them fabricate. Let them flip the narrative like a dying man flipping pages, looking for a spell that doesn't exist. Because you are the spell, the one that doesn't need incantation, just presence. And you've arrived, not to prove, not to please, but to reign. Because when heaven sends a soul, it doesn't send them with instructions. It sends them with impact. And impact doesn't ask permission. It replaces the atmosphere. So ask yourself now, are you still waiting for them to acknowledge the storm? Or have you finally realized you were the reason it rained? Because this isn't revenge. This is resurrection. And the only thing more terrifying than someone who survived fire is someone who became it. Now watch what happens when you walk through the third door. Because that door, it doesn't open with hands. It opens with destiny. And destiny, it already knows your name. Let them forget it. Let them mispronounce it. Let them choke on it. But they'll never unwrite it. You are written where paper fears to hold ink. Inscribed where eyes dare not look. They touched you, and now they remember. Because what they touched was the beginning of their ending, and the ending of your becoming. You are no longer a name. They turned you into a storm. You are no longer a soul. They unlocked a system. A system older than wrath. A system that recalibrates balance without warning. You are the reason whispers have weight. You are the reason even light looks over its shoulder. So stand firm, not as revenge, not as resistance, but as a reminder that even heaven has a line. And when it's crossed, hell doesn't erupt. It awakens and walks on 2 feet. Just like you. So now what? Now that the lines have blurred, now that the sacred and the scorched breathe in the same frame, what happens when the soul they tried to silence becomes the force that writes the aftermath? Because you were never meant to be palatable. You were meant to be pivotal, not a chapter, a turning point. They called you unstable, but what they really meant was unshakable. They labeled you dangerous, but what they feared was your clarity. Because clarity is a blade, and you didn't hold it, you became it, sharpened on their betrayal, forged in the furnace of every time they tried to reduce you. They thought they'd create weakness. What they made was a weaponized awakening. You are not a moment. You are a memory stitched into consequence, a ripple that became a tide. And now, every wave that hits them is a sermon written in your frequency. They tried to bury you in disbelief, and now they dig through denial, looking for a version of you that no longer exists. Because once you awaken hell, you don't go back to heaven politely. You rise with fire in your throat and scripture in your spine. You rise with names burned off your back and purpose pulsing in your blood. You rise, not to return, but to replace. You are not part of their story anymore. You are the footnote their legacy hopes no one reads, because you walked out of their narrative without breaking. And now, You're the story everyone studies when power decides to speak without words. You speak in silence, in decisions, in presence, in distance that hurts more than confrontation ever could. You moved without needing to move. And that is power they can't comprehend. Because it doesn't scream, it simply shifts gravity. It doesn't demand. It just exists until existence bends in your favor. And bend it did. Look at them now. Watch the way their voice breaks when your name enters a room. Watch how their certainty evaporates into tension, the same tension they once weaponized against you. It now holds them hostage. Because you are no longer reacting, you are redirecting. And redirection is brutal when it's divine. This is what happens when a soul survives distortion. It doesn't return to fix anything. It returns to be proof. Proof that not every broken thing bleeds. Some break beautifully. Some shatter into blueprints. You didn't need to heal to be whole. You needed to remember what wholeness looked like before the world distorted it. They don't want to face it, but the truth keeps showing up, wearing your face. You were the prophecy wrapped in flesh. You were the storm they dismissed as drizzle. And now you reign, not because you fought for a throne, but because you outlasted the collapse. Collapse of who they pretended to be. Collapse of the lies they fed the world. Collapse of the masks they wore while your name hung in their mouth, like a secret too dangerous to spit, yet too sacred to swallow. And now they wear your name like a shadow. It follows them, because guilt has a scent. And you are what it smells like when judgment finally breathes. You didn't get louder, you got clearer. Clarity is violence to those who thrived in your confusion. Clarity makes them recoil, makes them rewrite, makes them try to out-explain what they once celebrated. They said you were too much, because they knew they were too little to stand next to you unshaken. Now they whisper your story, hoping no one listens. But the world listens. The world always listens when truth starts echoing in a pitch only the brave can hear. And you're not here to be admired. You're here to be understood. Understood by the misread, the dismissed, the once misnamed. You don't rise alone. You rise as a mirror, reflecting back everything they tried to kill inside others. And now you're building temples out of trauma, crowns out of chaos. You're leading not with ego, but with evidence. Because you're not the survivor. You're the proof that survival was never enough. You came back to redefine existence. This isn't just your story anymore. This is every story that ever got silenced because it didn't fit their comfort. They told you not to speak. Now your existence is a speech. They told you not to fight. Now your stillness is a war cry. They told you not to rise. Now your rise has created a ripple they can't outrun. Watch them try. Watch them sprint from the version of themselves they pretended was harmless. Watch them buckle under the weight of pretending it didn't matter, but it did. Because you were the warning. And now you're the war. A war that doesn't need weapons, just awareness. Because awareness dismantles the entire system, now they live in reverse. They trace your steps, hoping to find where it all went wrong. But it didn't go wrong. It went real. And real is something they can't edit. They want edits. You give epilogues. They want closure. You give continuation. Because your story didn't end with their betrayal. It began there. It began the moment heaven turned its head and said, now. Now was never about time. Now was about alignment. And you aligned with a force they don't have names for. A force that speaks in movement and manifests in memory. Your memory is now their mirror. They stare into it and see what they lack. And that is the price. Not because you charged it, but because energy collects its own debt, and their bill just came due. You don't need revenge. You are revenge with a pulse. You are karma dressed in restraint. You are the aftermath of every underestimated soul that learned to stand still while the world caught fire. You didn't run. You watched it burn and became the ashes. Now you rise without sound, because when you've walked through that kind of inferno, you are the new law, not legal, not moral, spiritual. You are what balance looks like when mercy runs out. And balance? It always finds its way. Let them pray. Let them plead. Let them play innocent while their world bends beneath the weight of what they summoned. You didn't ask to be divine justice, but you accepted it. You walk now with a knowing, not arrogance, ancestry, as if every scar carries the voice of someone who never got to speak. And now you speak, without needing a stage, without needing applause. You speak through reality, because the realest ones never have to remind you who they are. They remind you of yourself, and if they forgot, then let this be the echo that brings them back. You are not a soul they should have feared. You are a soul they were warned about. They crossed the line. Now they meet the aftermath. And that aftermath has a name. Yours. And it's written in places no light can erase. The final seal is broken. The last prayer has been answered. You didn't return to change the world. You returned to correct it.